So
Okay.
don't stress too much if it doesn't look sexy. But I'm sure it's going to be great.
I'm not. I'm not too
Okay.
stressed. Don't worry.
So, Ian, it's very, very nice to meet you. I obviously I've been aware of you and your work for quite some time, and I completely, I don't know why it skipped my attention to not approach you sooner to get you on, but obviously Christine put us in touch, and I am incredibly grateful for that. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's no problem.
Ian, I wanted to I wanted to start basically right at the beginning for you. Like where exactly did you grow up?
Oh, so I grew up on the east coast of the U.S. So I was born in a suburb of New York City, and uh, earliest memory was living in Rhode Island. But I really considered my childhood to be that in Western Massachusetts. I lived in a town called Agawam, which is a suburb of Springfield, Massachusetts, whose claim to fame is it's the birthplace of basketball. And I grew up there in elementary school. And so the beginning part of my life was there. I briefly lived in Minneapolis area in Minnesota, and then in 1988, my family moved to Southern California to a town called Torrance. It's a suburb of LA, and been I was a California guy since 1988. So I born on the East Coast, but I consider myself Californian at heart. A bit, most of my life is there, with short stints in Japan and now France. But my heart is my heart is Californian.
How old were you guys when you moved out to California?
Oh gosh, I was 13,
Okay.
13 years old, which not easy. It was terrifying actually to I was when I was a kid in middle school in Minnesota, I was kind of a skateboarding artist outcast. I lived in a very preppy part of town, and my friend and I, we were the skateboarding punks with the long hair off to one side and the long shorts, and we would skate, and I would draw, and then my dad was a toy designer, and we moved across the country to follow his career. And when we moved, parents told me we were moving to California. I panicked because I thought, oh my God, we're gonna move to the epicenter of cool. And imagine I was 13, 12 years old, 1988, reading Thrasher magazine and Transworld Skateboarding magazine, and everything in those magazines is Southern California. And I was terrified. Like everybody in California is so cool. I'm never gonna be as cool as them. And uh, I remember we moved in the middle of the school year, so it was my eighth grade, and we got in our we moving truck. We followed it from Minnesota to California in January, and we left Minneapolis, and it was blizzard, and in Celsius it was about must have been
Oh my
minus 10,
God.
minus 20. And by the time we arrived in LA, it was sunshine and 70 degrees. And I remember the first day after arriving, it was like palm trees were outside the window. And my father took me to the middle school there. And I walked up to the middle school, and there was a pile of skateboards in the entryway. And I was like, oh, I think I'll be okay here. And it was great. And it was funny because I had already known about the art center, which is the school I went to at that time. So within 2 weeks of arriving in California, actually my dad and I drove up to art center to check out the school. So um, yeah, I guess I can say I was very happy that my dad switched jobs and we moved to California.
Wow. What?
And yeah.
So Ian, like as your father being a toy designer, was this something that influenced your creative intuition?
Yeah, I mean, I would honestly, my whole family is kind of arts and design friendly. Um, my dad was a toy designer. He went to a design school in Bridgeport, Connecticut, for product design, and then my mom is a fine artist and costume maker. So she's always been painting, and my great grandfather was a sculptor. My aunt was a my both my aunts are fine artist painters, and my grandfather was an aeronautical designer, and so there was always a creative streak in the house, and it was always an inspiration, and I guess being surrounded by the artistic process was really great, and I looking back on it, I'm very fortunate, honestly, to have that being normal, that's a part of life. And so when I was a kid, I used to on snow days and the East Coast, when it snows you don't go to school. So on snow days I would go with my dad to the office. He worked at a company called Melton Bradley at the time, and I would go with him to the design studio, and I would hang out in his office all day with giant pads of paper and marker sets and colored pencils and all these other designers, and I would eat donuts and draw things, and it was really great. And then, like on days I was home with my mom, who was a stay-at-home mom at the time, she would paint, and so we would be in the living room together, and she'd be painting, and then I would be down with my pad of paper, drawing cars, probably cars, and airplanes and cities and robots. And I used to, I used to make. We weren't really wealthy, by no means, and so I always wanted these giant robots when I was a kid, and we couldn't afford them, and so I would make them out of like paper towel
Wow.
rolls and toilet paper rolls and old paint tubes, and so I would make my own giant robots. That was my hobby, and so I would draw. My mom would paint. My dad would design, and at the same time, my father's family was like car nuts, gearheads, and so I was surrounded by design and art, but also by cars, which was also awesome. And like, so I would go to my grandparents' house in Connecticut, and in in their driveway, and in their yard, they wouldn't have like old American cars on blocks. They had like
Wow.
Alfa Romeos and Fiats, and my grandfather had a bright orange E-Type Jag Roadster, and my uncle had his Formula Ford race car covered with a tarp in the driveway, and my grandparents had the suicide door Lincoln
Wow.
Continental, and my grandfather had a Smokey and the Bandit Trans Am, and so it was like fate, right? Like I had this car culture, and then I had this drawing culture, and I've told the story before, so for anybody listening who's now hearing me repeat myself, my apologies.
Don't
But
apologize.
um, I I I was a kid. Here's a 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid getting Road and Track magazine, right? That's weird. And so I would be getting a Road and Track, and at the time in the early '80s, they had an artist called his name was Mark Sternberger, designer, and he was a teacher at Art Center as well. And I would look through the magazine, and there would be these future car renderings, and they were marker at the time. There's no Photoshop. And so I was looking at the magazine, and I asked my dad, "It's like, how does this guy draw like this? Like, it looks real." And my dad got out. He said, "Oh, I'll show you." And so one night he came from home from work, and he got this giant pad of paper in the dining room, the kitchen nook, and he took out some ad markers, and he rendered in a totally like 70s rendering style where it's like streaks. He he drew a Ferrari Testarossa, and it blew my mind. And I was like, holy shit. Of course, I didn't say that when I was 9, but thinking back on it, that's my internal
was
dialogue.
that the first time you had
And
seen him do that?
I thought this is what I want to do. Yeah, it's like this is what I want to do. And so at that point, it was um, like wow, when I was 11, I found out about the school called Art Center. I was living in Minnesota, and I was like, I really want to go here, and this is what I want to do because, um, you know, one thing I love to do is ride my BMX bike with my friends, or draw cars. So very limited choices really, and I started drawing more and more, and yeah, we moved to Minnesota, and I was 11 and 12, and my dad brought home these. It was a quarterly magazine called Automobile Quarterly, very fancy car magazine, hardcover, and they had a contest for car design. This is 1986. I'll have to find you the rendering, the sketch that I did, and they had a contest, national contest, and it was one of the judges was Chuck Jordan, who was the head of GM Design at the time. And I entered the contest. I drew this yellow sports car, and it has turbo on the wheels. And I got this letter 2 months later that's like, oh, you're a quarter finalist nationally.
Wow.
It's like, wow, so that was it. And I can go on and on about the next steps, but yeah, like I said, we moved to California, went up to Art Center, and I got into high school, and my high school art teacher was very supportive as well, and he knew all about Art Center, Southern California guy, and I said, hey, I really want to go to Art Center, and his eyes lit up, like maybe one of his students could get into that school. And so for the 4 years of my high school art class, he kind of just said, you can do the assignments, but also you can kind of do your own thing to work on your entrance portfolio. You can practice this kind of stuff. So I did that, and when I was 16, I joined this thing at Art Center. It's called Saturday High School, and it's a Saturday design class created for local high school kids who have interest in attending Art Center, and it kind of gives you a 9 to 10 week taste of what what the university is like. And so I went to Saturday High. It's 1990, and I had a Smokey and the Bandit Trans Am at the time that could barely go 30 miles before the radiator exploded. And so every Saturday I would hop in my Trans Am. It was literally black and gold Trans Am with bird on the hood that I bought with my own money. And the hood was tied down with a rope and a coat hanger. So I would get on the freeway in Torrance, drive up to Pasadena, pray that the car wouldn't break down every Saturday on the way to Art Center. And I would spend the afternoon there, and it was just another sign that, yeah, this is for sure what I want to do. And yeah, it was just really great. I mean, it's really funny because like I think about I still remember the first models I saw in the lobby the first time I went to Art Center, and I know those people. And I remember when I started Art Center, the model I saw in the lobby, the guy that has a model in the front of the Art Center lobby is currently the head of Lexus Design that I work with in Japan. So it's just really a funny life story. I guess I rambled, but if I had to go back to the beginning, definitely support from my family and my teachers was really crucial, I think, in allowing me to pursue my dream and to not give up, really.
But there's so many things that aligned for you, because I can't, like, not only geographically did things work out, you had this creative influence from your parents, you also had this realization at a pretty early age, like, this is what I want to do. And then on top of it, you had the supportive high school teacher that was like, you can use some of this time to work on a portfolio. I didn't even know what a portfolio was until I left school, So it's a really, really good start. Your internships, Ian.
Yeah, and
sorry, no, carry on.
Yeah. No. I was just gonna say you're right. It was. I joke about fate, but really I think it was like a passion at a young age that was nurtured, and allowed to nurture by my parents, and but something inside me, that's really the only thing I was interested in, honestly, was drawing, and I think, kind of knowing what I wanted to do at an early age, I thought deeply about what I wanted to do and how to get there. But you're right, it's like to have a dad who's a designer who can show you what rendering is, talking about portfolios, being excited that I was interested in art center, having an art teacher who was excited I was interested in art center, and then being able to get in. I think, yeah, everything, and people joke that it's like, of course you're doing what you're doing. It's like A plus B equals this. And, but, I also toyed with being a history professor or going to film school, but honestly, I didn't have the best grades because I didn't excel at math. Let's just say that. But yeah, no, it's definitely kismet, as they say.
That moment where your dad came home from work and he drew that Testarossa, was that something that you had not seen him do before?
No, because I hadn't seen my dad do that before, because he was a designer at work, and although I would go to work with him, by the time I started going to work with him more often, he was already kind of in management. And in the toy business, it's a lot about model building. Like it's product design. You're making working prototypes of toys. So it's a little bit different than what we do. And so I hadn't really seen that before. I had seen my mom paint all the time, and I would sit there in awe watching her paint, and I loved the smells of oil paint. She painted in oils. She still does. She's a amazing artist. The smell of oil paint. So I saw her paint. I never really saw my dad draw that much, and yeah, it was obviously it had an impact because I still talk about it as if it just happened yesterday. And it's funny because after he did that, I made these automotive flashcards. They're like baseball cards with facts on them, and I still have two of them. They're online somewhere. But like one's a 928 Porsche and one's a 1984 Corvette, and it's this little kind of badly drawn 3/4 tip up of each car in pencil, and then on the back it's stats like 0 to 60, top speed, overall weight, and I still have these. I have these locked away in my safe at home, which is
classic
cute.
Stats.
So. Yeah, it's an interesting journey.
Ian, I was going to ask you about internships that you did while you were at Art Center. Was that at Calty as well? And was that in Newport or Ann Arbor?
No. I had one internship when I was at Art Center. I interned with Porsche in Weissach, actually. And when I was in Art Center, I was really fortunate to, halfway through my Art Center life, I was awarded the Porsche Scholarship, which is a full ride scholarship, and it was very lucky. Aki Manchait actually picked me out. And
Wow.
I still remember that day. He came to Art Center. He saw my work. We did interviews, and I remember I got my department chair at the time called me into a meeting. I left my Viscom class to have this. He said, "Hey, I need to talk to you," and he pulls me into his office. He's like, "Porsche just gave you the Porsche scholarship, and it's full ride, and you get to go intern in Porsche." And I was like, I still remember that night because my my closest friends and I in my Viscom class, we all went and celebrated that evening. And so in 1996, I went to Weissach and I interned at Porsche. And I had never been overseas before. It was the first time in my life I had been overseas. First time I ever left America. And went to Porsche, and I remember Aki Manchait picked us up at the airport, picked me up, and then drove me to the studio immediately. And the very first thing I saw was the 996 Porsche that hadn't been seen by anybody outside the company. So if you remember, it's the first water-cooled.
Were you like, what the hell have you guys done to the headlights?
No, at the time, everybody makes fun of those headlamps, but you have to remember, in the 90s, linking graphics with cut lines was really in vogue. You think about the Ford Ka and the Audi A6, and the TT wasn't even out yet, but the Porsche was trying to combine everything into one lamp and connect it to the hood shut line. Was very at the moment. I just saw it and I said I couldn't believe there's a new 911 sitting in front of me. And at the time it was so sleek and so smooth. It looked hyper modern compared to the previous car. But I interned at Porsche. I was there for I think 4.5 months, and it was like dream come true to be a childhood gearhead to all of a sudden be in the center of Porsche world. And Grant Larson was my mentor. Grant Larson was assigned to kind of keep an eye on me, and to see the Boxster being developed, to seeing the 911 being developed. I worked on I was assigned to do a Boxster Coupe, which was before the Cayman, and I I had to do. It was taking the Boxster, but having the cabin stop right before the convertible split line. So it was a little bit different looking. And the goal was to kind of make it like a 914. So I did 4 months in Weissach, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my entire life. We would go eat lunch in the canteen, then we would walk over to the test track, and we would see the Porsche GT1 of that era do high-speed test runs on the test track while we ate our brochen with bread. And I remember on Halloween, I just posted this on Instagram actually. On Halloween, we went down. Grant Larson took us to the garage, and he opened up the garage, and there was the Boxster concept car, the original, sitting in the garage with flat tires. And we pushed it out of the garage, and we sat in it, and we were taking Polaroids, because this is pre-mobile phone days, and sat in the Boxster concept car. I couldn't fit in it. It was beautiful, and I got a ride in a 959 in their viewing yard, and one of my best friends, Raphael Zamet, who was a designer there at the time. We went to the Paris Motor Show together, and we took a Boxster prototype that wasn't released. It still hadn't been released to the public. They were still just using it in the test grounds, and somehow we got our hands on a Boxster prototype that had the word prototype in old German script on the door, and you know that's like a 30-letter long word. The complete side of the car has that word on it, and we drove that. I'm 21 years old, and we drove from Weissach to Paris through the
What?
French countryside. And I remember the French police let us park in front of the Eiffel Tower and take photos because nobody had seen this car before. And then we show up at the Paris Auto Show, and we walk into the auto show, and Harm Lagai, who's the Porsche boss at that time, we walk up to the Porsche stand, and he's looking down on us like we just did something super terribly wrong. Like, he looked at us like, you idiots. And apparently, we weren't supposed to take any of the top secret prototype outside the country.
Jesus.
So, that's one of those memories that's burned into my, right up here. Never gonna forget it.
Would never happen today.
Sorry.
No, sorry. There's a bit of latency. I was just saying that would never happen today.
No, it would never happen today. Not with. I think the fact that there weren't any cell phones allowed that to happen, because nobody could call us within 10 minutes of leaving the gate to tell us that you're not supposed to take that car outside the county, outside the country, into another country. But I learned a lot on that internship, and worked really hard. We worked really late. It was exciting as hell, and it was really like it was an eye opener about the real world of car design, and it was a really great experience, and I'll never forget it. And it's funny because I was, before I came to France, I was an instructor at Art Center. I taught what's called Viscom 5, which is Visual Communication 5, which is a Photoshop sketch and rendering class. And when I was still teaching right before I came, a lot of students were doing 2, 3, 4 internships, which I couldn't imagine back in my time. We were in such a hurry to graduate and get out of there, but I think, if you have one great internship, it can have a lasting effect on you. And so I got back from the internship, and I said, okay, this is great. I'm going to work at Porsche when I graduate. No problem. And it ended up not working out that way. I ended up working for Toyota and Lexus. Was
there any specific reason that you didn't go to Porsche, or did it just not happen?
Well, it's kind of sad, actually. I mean, I was expecting to go there because typically, if you got the Porsche scholarship, it was kind of common knowledge that you would end up working there. But I remember they came to visit 2 weeks before my graduation, and they said, you were really great. The internship was wonderful. Really loved having you there. Unfortunately, EU hiring rules means we can really only hire EU citizen. If they basically said they didn't want to hire me because I wasn't EU citizen, it's kind of ironic because now in my position we're in the same boat. Really, it's just much better. It's not impossible, but it's much easier to hire within the European Union. So I was in a panic because I had 2 weeks to go, and then at Art Center they have this thing called the Senior Show, and what that was is it was 1 week of you putting your best of on display in the senior trans room, and you usually put your 5, 6, 7, 8 semester work on display, and then the school would invite all the companies in, and at that time it was 5 days, and it was 2 companies per day, which now when I see the current graduating class, I feel the pain because it's not the same anymore. I think we had more opportunity. So the economy was terrible when I graduated, but we had that opportunity to see more companies. And I had some good interviews and I was, I had a good show. I worked really hard. Basically, in Art Center, I think my averaged sleeping was probably 4 nights a week. So usually I would stay up all night, and I brought a mattress, a mat to the senior room, and I would, when the security guards weren't looking, I would sleep for an hour under my desk, and then get up for class. So we would work until 3, 4, 5 in the morning, take a nap, get up and do class. So by the time the senior show came around, interviewed a bunch of companies. I remember the first company was Ford, and I actually didn't sleep the night before, and I took a shower. I washed my hair in the sink at Art Center in the bathroom, and I washed my hair. I put on a suit, and I interviewed with Jack Telnack, who was one of my heroes at the time. I had him sign I had a Ford GT90 18 scale diecast model, which I love that car, the white one, and I had him sign it. And but yeah, it was part of the thrill. It was really part of the experience. And I had a whole week of interviews, and at the almost the last day, Calty Design came in. Calty Design is Toyota and Lexus's advanced design studio in Southern California. There's also Calty Ann Arbor, and there's a studio in Oakland. It's all the same company. And Calty was the first car design studio in California, actually, before anybody else. So Toyota had the foresight to open a advanced studio in Southern California back in the early 70s, which is cool. And at the time, I didn't know anything about it because I wanted to work at Porsche or Honda. Those were my two dream jobs, and Honda was so cool in the mid 90s, right? It's like Prelude, VTEC, Civic Si, Integra, Type R, NSX. It's like, I want to work for Honda or Porsche. And then Calty came in. At the time, it was this mysterious black box. Like, I had no idea what they did, and it was like Toyota Skunk Works. And they interviewed me, and I thought it went well. And I went home, and they called me that night and said, "Hey, we want to interview you. Can you come in?" And I said, "Okay, great. Yeah, when?" And they said, "In a couple days." So I didn't have my portfolio or anything together, and so I had to cobble together a portfolio. And I went down to Calty, and at the time I was preparing to go to. Actually, I was thinking of interview. I was about to maybe go to Paris to interview with PSA, and Calty, they got me down there and had a great interview. And in hindsight, I think I showed too much work. I literally threw everything in the kitchen sink on their meeting table. It was, so much work. And I was like, okay, this either went really great or really terrible. And I went home, and that night they called that night and said, "We'd love to offer you a job." And I was like, "I'll take it because I get to stay in Southern California." And I was really, really fortunate. And that was when the 90s economy finally started improving. It was really bad when I started Art Center, like really terrible, actually. And just kind of got the luck of timing. And sorry, somebody just left me a note on my office door.
It's okay.
We're still working.
It's okay.
We're in the studio. So I'm actually broadcasting from my office. So
it looks pretty.
There's still a lot of people here in the studio, but yeah, it's funny because they're like, "Hey, look at that." So yeah, and I ended up working for Toyota, and I thought, yeah, I'll be here for 5 years, and then I'm out. I'm gonna go somewhere else. And 23 and a half years later,
It's
here
insanity. I
we
mean,
are.
I was doing my usual LinkedIn stalking, and I was like, my God, like, I was like, it's got to have been a good ride, otherwise you wouldn't have stayed there so long. So, and yeah, I mean, you've obviously, your roles changed significantly over the years. Before we kind of get into that, Ian, I just wanted to know. You talked earlier on about also teaching at Art Center that you basically had been doing since '98, right? All the way up until when you left recently. Um,
Correct.
how did you find the
Yeah.
energy to do that after a full week's work? Because it's not like you're just going in there for 1 or 2 hours in the evening. As I understand it, you are there for half a day on Saturdays, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I kind of fell into teaching not by accident, but as a favor. Another friend of mine, Mike Tsai, who's a designer at Honda, he was teaching. He taught my Viscom 5 class. He was my teacher, and he at a certain point, I was his TA for 3 semesters. So from set 6, 7, 8, I was the teacher's assistant. And it came a point when after about half year after I graduated, it was 1998. He said, "Hey, I need to take a break. Do you want to fill in for me?" And I said, "Oh, that's a great opportunity because at the time art center instructors were generally a little bit older, and I was 1998. I was 25 years old, 24 years old, right? Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And so I started. I started in '98, and I was hooked. It was scary because I remember the first time I started teaching. I was at the same age or younger than most of the students because art centers at that time, art centers average age skewed a little bit older because usually everybody, including myself, they go to another college first. I went to a local community college. That's what I could afford to get my general education out of the way. So I went to community college, but a lot of people in art center are kind of mid-20s. Now it's a little bit younger. So I started teaching in '98, and at that time we were still doing big 20 by 40 inch vellum marker and chalk renderings and canson paper renderings. Nothing was digital, and I was hooked. I loved the thrill of teaching. It was really tiring. The first 2 years it was a weeknight class split in two. So I would drive from Calty in Newport Beach, and then I would drive up to Pasadena after work twice a week. And after 2 years of that, I just said, "Hey," to the admin. I said, "I can't do this anymore. I'm wiped out because it's a 2-hour drive." And so we moved the class to Saturdays. And it's interesting that you asked that question because it's super inspiring. I love teaching. I love I love being able to provide something meaningful to students that have a very passionate belief in what they want to do, and also they're spending a lot of money. The school's expensive, so I always wanted to make sure I gave something meaningful and useful to everybody, and I love teaching. It was inspiring. It also kept my skills up because I could still I had to give my class. I used to give a lot of demos, like demonstrations, and so usually about 6, 7 times a semester, I would do an actual hands-on demonstration, and so that kind of kept my skill level up too. So it's kind of win-win, really. And I I love the inspiration part of the class, and I love being involved with Art Center. It's very rewarding personally. it is also quite tiring. It's amazingly tiring to have to say something meaningful to everybody for 5 hours, 6 hours straight. And usually I would get home and take about a 3 hour nap because your mind is just, it's like wired the whole time. And it, um, you know, because everything you say has to have some consequence or meaning. And, but through the years, I was well, in the trans department, I was the first one to start teaching Photoshop. So I introduced Photoshop to the Art Center Viscom curriculum, which was cool. And in those days, it was all paths. So I drew everything with paths. So it was hyper crisp, right? Super technical, crispy. And, over the last 18 years, I just devolved into painting. I render in Photoshop more like painting. Like I use 4 brushes and I build up layers like you're painting an acrylic painting. But I love teaching, and it's funny because in the 5 years ago I lived in Japan for a year and a half. I did a brief stint in Toyota headquarters. I was the designer of the current Toyota Camry, and I led the exterior team there. And so I was there for about a year and a half, and all of a sudden I had my weekends free. And it was amazing to have 2 days to do something rather than one day. And I was like, oh, this is a revelation. I think when I go back, I'm not going to teach. And I went back, I moved back to California, and they asked, could you come back to the class? I'm like, okay. I don't really want to, but I'll start teaching again. I went back to class, and that semester was awesome, and it was so fun. And one of the guys in that class we hired at Calthy, and that is the ultimate reward, to have one of your students, either you hire them. That's the most amazing reward, but it's so rewarding to see everybody that's gone through your class over these past 22 years having so much success, and to see people that went through your class that are just killing it in the industry. It's such a great feeling. I really, really love it. So I went back, I started teaching again. I'm like, yeah, I still like this. So even now, from here in France, I sit in, I try to, when I'm invited, I try to sit in on finals and give my critiques. And this past summer, I was remotely involved with a Lexus project for a fourth term project. So I still try to give back. I still try to be involved with Art Center because I think I love it too much, really. So, but teaching is fun. I think it's great. I would, if anybody out there has the chance to do it at any university or any school, and times are changing, things are becoming more diffused around the internet and the world, especially in this pandemic era. But if you have the chance to teach or mentor or inspire, take it, because it's immensely rewarding to give back, but also it keeps your own skill level up in a more practical sense. But I truly love teaching, so it's why I kind of overloaded myself to do two jobs, I guess you could say, over all these years.
I'm terrified of doing it. I mean, I've been asked, and yeah. I just don't feel qualified enough. Even after 10 years, I mean, I just don't feel qualified enough. But it's yeah, I don't know. I'm terrified at the prospect.
You'd be surprised. I told you I was terrified. I was like, hey, I'm younger than half my class. I just graduated. I have less than a year's experience in the industry. What can I offer? And I think if you feel confident in your own abilities and you're willing to take the time to work with everybody in the class, I think you'd be surprised how you could adjust to it, and how much people would be grateful for any help. That's what I've really found over the years, and like I said, during this pandemic, um, I've people have reached out to me for advice and my opinions, and I'm super busy, but I try to help people when I can. I'm not able to get to everyone, but I think, Sam, I think if you're offered it, you should try it at least once, because it's hyper rewarding, and I think you'd be surprised that especially 10 years of knowledge is a lot. You have a lot to offer, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. So, in my day, there was Art Center, there was CCS, there was RCA, Coventry, and Cincinnati, and then Strat. And now there's a lot more Design University, and then of course online. Every time I open my Instagram, there's a 1,000 sketches online. So I think there's a lot more. There's a lot different ways. There's a lot more different ways to learn this business now. But I think what's missing is the experience or guidance of somebody with experience in the industry. And so if it's offered, I'd take it. I think you would find it really satisfying.
I'll bear that in mind.